Beehive banter is back for another week, dissecting their political bills, the media releases, the interviews, the toing, the froing, the blame, the bluster. Joining me to lift the wool that some may be trying to pull over our eyes, NBR political editor extraordinaire, Brent Edwards. And Brent, this week, anniversary time. It's, 5 years since the Labour government took the reins after being handed them on a platter. So one big question, and I want you to bear this in mind: hopelessness, homelessness, same thing, in crisis. Health, in crisis. Inflation, crisis. Finding workers, crisis. Rail, crisis. Prison system, crisis. And I could go on, but unusually, I won't. So what have they actually achieved in 5 years, Brent?
I think you've conflated a few crises there, Grant. I'm not sure that all are crises, problems, but not necessarily.
Well, which one
crisis.
in that list isn't?
Well, I mean, every time if you look at the health system's always under strain.
No, I'm going to get to health soon.
Yeah. But, well, homelessness, is it a crisis? It's certainly
Well, go to Rotorua and ask them if it's a crisis.
It's a deep problem for those people who are homeless. There's no doubt about that.
Well, it's a deep problem for the tourists who don't go to Rotorua anymore.
Yeah, but how many... inflation... inflation, well, I see Australia's gone to 7.3 as well, so we're in step with pretty much everyone else on inflation.
Well, which one of these is not a crisis?
Well, how do you define a crisis when you say...
Well, I write it down that it is.
I know. I think, look, a lot of them are serious problems. It's just a matter of, crisis. It's the argument people got into about whether there was
tomato.
There was an argument that people got into whether there was a housing crisis, and National said there wasn't a housing crisis when they were in government.
5 years in government, you can no longer go back to National.
No, I'm not going back. I'm just saying when people define crises depends on where they sit in the political spectrum.
All right, enough of that. What have they achieved? What's this government actually achieved in 5 years?
Well, I mean, I think, when you...
No, I don't know. What?
You made reference to 5 years, and Grant Robertson used the Prime Minister's post-cabinet press conference, because he was there, because the Prime Minister was meant to be heading to Antarctica, to sort of talk about some of their achievements. And although he did acknowledge one of his problems, and he told NBR this a few weeks earlier, that he was a bit frustrated by the slow pace of infrastructure being built. But again...
Sorry. He's a bit frustrated by the slow infrastructure when they said they were going to build how many 100,000 houses in how many years?
Oh, well, they were going to build 100,000 Kiwi-built homes over 10 years.
Yes.
They abandoned that.
No, I know that, but Grant Robertson can't go back now and say he's frustrated.
They abandoned that target, but on housing, I mean, actually, if you look at full housing, they're building a lot more state houses. And actually,
the waiting lists have
and a lot more
private
houses have been built over the last 5 years. I mean, record levels of building actually.
Yeah, but now to the point where all prices are going to drop. What one bank's saying, 27%.
Yeah, and that's a big problem for them, because obviously one big thing that happened, and particularly through COVID, was house prices went through the roof, which made housing unaffordable for a lot of people. Now you're getting the drop, which is going to hurt a hell of a lot of people who are in houses.
What have this government achieved?
Well, what they'll say is that they've got the country...
I don't care what they say. I know what they say. They say lots. I'm asking you.
Well, they had to get the country through COVID, and I know people will be critical of that, but that was a massive impact on the one thing.
So did Boris Johnson, but he's gone.
No, well, I'm not sure that he got the UK through COVID as well as this government got New Zealand through COVID. Right. But the one thing that's actually surprising about all of that is that everyone talks as though we're post-COVID, when in fact we now have cases rising strongly. Deaths, 41 deaths last week reported, and yet no one seems to be criticising the government over its COVID response, apart from perhaps the Green Party and Te Pāti Māori. National and ACT won't criticise the government because they were saying they should have relaxed long ago, and the criticism that the government mainly faces was it was too tough in terms of its economic approach and lockdowns.
Right, so basically what you're saying is, in the last 5 years, the only thing that this government has achieved is they've got us through COVID, and it's still ongoing.
Government books are in decent shape. I know people disagree. Unemployment's at record lows.
How many people are on the unemployment benefit, and how many? And then you go and work out how many jobs are available, and they're not applying.
I know. But the statistic that's been used to measure unemployment through successive governments, no one's fiddled with it. It's at historic lows.
All right. I mentioned health. since Labor came in, increased health spending of 40%. But our health system appears worse than it's ever been. In fact, new figures revealing 1 in 4 waiting longer than 6 hours to be treated at ED. It was 1 in 10 when Labor came in. Is it a case, Brent, of not enough money invested, or no matter how much you spend, there's always going to be issues?
Well, yeah,
and with people like you and me, well, more you, getting older.
Well, it is interesting because, again, Grant Robertson made the point. I think health spending's gone up 40% or something like
just
that.
said that,
this
40%.
government. And yet you're not seeing the kind of outcomes that you'd expect in terms of better health.
You're not seeing any outcomes, are you?
Well, you are. People are
seeing
still...
worse outcomes.
Well, you're seeing... Well, a lot of people still go through hospital, and I have to say, I went through ED a month or two ago, and I have to say, I did wait a long time, but I could not fault the service.
No, fair enough. I mean, that's... Yeah.
But they've got problems. One of the interesting things is when Labor's in government, the health sector tends to speak much more loudly and moan a lot more because they know that a Labor government's more likely to spend money on them than when National's in office.
Well, they don't want to bring those targets back, but does that actually make a difference, or do they just rob Peter to pay Paul?
Yeah, look, the targets are interesting, and I mean, because in fact it goes to a point that the Auditor General's been making for some time, and that in terms of tracking government spending, it's hard to work out what outcomes are achieved. You can work out what outputs have been achieved, but so presumably you spend money on health to improve the health of all New Zealanders.
Yeah.
Now, you can get targets as the previous National government set, like, for instance, the number of operations that are done in a particular year.
Well, you can set the target, but whether you get them or not.
But those in themselves are outputs. That doesn't actually necessarily mean that people are better off. And I know, for instance, in one hospital, in the last couple of months, they pushed through a whole lot of very, very minor surgeries to reach the target. So they ticked the target off, but it didn't necessarily mean people who wanted hip replacements and that sort of thing actually got better treatment quicker than they otherwise would have.
Well, you mentioned to me earlier this week that it's very similar to when Helen Clark was PM. What did she do about it?
Yeah, well, see, that Labor government from 1999 to 2008 spent a lot more money on health. They invested more in health, proportionately more than the previous National government had. And I do know that at the end of that period, Helen Clark as Prime Minister was frustrated that you didn't quite see the real outcomes in health and improvements in the health that you might have thought would come from that extra spending. So health does chew up a lot of money. I mean, because you've got demand-driven, just more people, but also as new medicines come, and that's been a debate because Farm Act doesn't fund every medicine, but also new surgical procedures. But often they cost more, and then the medical profession can do things to keep people alive who otherwise, 10 years ago would have died. But again, costs more. So there's a lot of inbuilt cost in the system, let alone about, paying your staff, and at the moment, particularly the focus on nurses, properly for the work they do.
Would you say the health system's in crisis? It's a yes or no. It's not a multiple choice.
No.
Right, moving on. A new milestone was reached this week with the new Labor MP Soraya Peki-Mason replacing Trevor Mallard being sworn in. And with that, we joined 5 other countries where women now equal men in numbers in Parliament for the first time, an equal split, a milestone. Well, in fact, they outnumber men thanks to Gaurav Sharma quitting. About time, many would say.
What, that Gaurav Sharma quit?
Well, that too.
I suppose in a way it's a reflection of the change that we've seen under MMP, because before MMP, under the old first past the post system, you could count the number of women on probably the fingers of one hand almost in Parliament, and so increasing numbers of women, but also obviously increasing numbers of Maori, Pacifica, and Asian MPs as well. So, and I guess it's important, and it's particularly important in the context if you're looking at what's happening in Iran, that that this country can say women should be treated equally to men, and in the Parliament now, half and half, or as you say, slightly over half now, women MPs. Yeah, it's a reflection on, I suppose, a change in New Zealand society.
Good. All right, a couple more quick subjects.
So it's not a crisis?
No, I didn't think that one was a crisis. A couple more quick subjects. Clean car rebates are great for those who can afford them to get cash back in the pocket, but now it seems those Tesla owners, big one, is 30 million cash back to those who are more than likely going to buy one anyway. A good idea to promote EVs, or just a Christmas present for the wealthy?
Well, I guess that's the argument. People have said about that program, the Clean Car Discount, as to whether it would actually just, and maybe some of those people who bought the Teslas, who obviously got a lot of money, maybe they didn't need to take the subsidy from the government. They're probably likely the sorts who will criticise others for accepting government subsidies, but never mind. But aside from the Teslas, though, there have been an increased uptake of Nissan Leafs, and I think Toyota.
Yeah, but changes are coming, aren't they?
Yeah.
The government's going to do something.
Changes are coming. The government's argument always was that at the time that it acknowledged that people with money were the ones who were going to benefit initially from this. But the argument they put up, and we probably won't be able to see the benefit of that or not for a few years yet, was it would introduce more cars into the system that at the end would, when they were sold as second-hand cars...
trickle down.
Basically, trickle down.
Yeah, but besides incentives, though, what else can you actually do to incentivise people to go electric? Do we rely on their green, save the planet, touchy-feely, right thing to do attitude? Because that ain't going to do it.
Or you push up the price of petrol so far that people...
I suppose that could do it, yeah. All right, now, fair pay agreements. New law now, with the government saying they've delivered on the election promise. Wow, at last, Brent. And there's a first. I digress. Ending, they say, New Zealand's 30-year failed experiment with a low-cost labour market, with the Nats saying, enjoy them while they last. Now, it's one thing having the law, but how long before it's actually going to be tested in court? Won't be long, will it?
Look, well, my understanding is, a number of unions have already started, gathering signatures. But given the process,
That didn't take long.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting as to whether any of these fair pay negotiations will get up and actually into contract before the election. It seems unlikely, and certainly National doesn't.
Well, the unions would say, wouldn't they, that there's a bit of a rush on because they want to get in before the legislation goes again.
There's a rush on, but in terms of the legislation and the process that it follows, it's they've only got 12 months, if that, to start negotiations, reach an agreement, and get the deal put in place. Now, it's going to be rushed. If they manage one or two, they'll probably be lucky. Certainly National doesn't think any will be in place by the time of the election. But, it does set up one very clear issue going into the election campaign. If people like fair pay agreements and agree with them, they've got...
I'm not sure people even know what they mean.
I think the people who work in those sectors where they're not paid that well probably have got a fair understanding of what it might mean.
Yeah, although at a time right now where you can't get bus drivers, for example, so that the wages are going up. Well, it's the only way you can get them. Well,
that's right, because one of the reasons you can't get them now is you pay them so poorly. There's no incentive for people to work in those sorts of jobs.
But that's why they're paying more now.
Well, how much more are they paying, Grant?
Well, I heard $30 an hour. It might be, some talk of that.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what they'll negotiate and part of a fair pay agreement, because bus drivers have been identified by the council trade unions as one
but they keep mentioning
workers.
them. They just...
Because they argue...
Them and cleaners. Is there anyone else?
Yeah, well...
Just those two. That's all they even mention.
Supermarket workers.
Okay, there's three.
Security guards.
Okay, but it's always those four.
But the concern that employers have, that Business New Zealand has raised, is under legislation, any group of workers can use it, including high-paid broadcast people like yourself.
Oh, sorry. I wasn't listening to you. I was counting my money in my head. That is our week of delving into the political diatribe. We eagerly await the blame and accusations that will surely be coming in the next week about, everything. Thanks, Brent, for your learned counsel. Time to get in your EV, your electric vehicle, your new one, as quietly as a mouse. Oh, your hybrid, is it? And quietly as a mouse, head home whilst emitting no greenhouse gases. I'll do the same, although in my SUV, a bit more noisier. All right, we, as usual, appreciate you watching or listening. We'll catch you again hopefully soon. Thank you.